Hey, everybody. Welcome to Locker Room. This is Southland's podcast for men, where we redeem men's conversations, talk about the right things in the right ways. My name's Scott Hatfield. Thanks for checking out the podcast. This podcast is all about creating a strong, healthy, godly culture of men that fight for the most important things. And today, I had to do a little additional research on our guest because, I'm just a little bit unsure about him. He's come well recommended, but there's some stuff. And so I spoke to his wife.
Oh no!
Try to get the real story. And so, if you don't know who this is, we'll get to him in a second. But here's what I learned. All right, and man, this is great. It says he loves history, all kinds, U.S. world history, which is super romantic. I love this already. It's getting great. Big on geography, not just history, but geography. He knows every country in the world and has shameless facts about all these places. So you can't stump him. I mean, he's going to crush it on trivia. You may not know this about him, but he also loves music. He's got two big genres that he loves. It's 80s, which I love, and classic rock, which I love as well. And also has a great love and a vast knowledge of church hymns. She said, every once in a while you just hear him talk about hymns or singing a hymn, that type of thing. He's
My wife told you that?
Yes. Yeah. He's a loud chewer. Never had.
Wow, she threw me under the bus.
Yeah, never had his wisdom teeth out. So he's got extra teeth to chew on stuff. My wife hates the way I chew. I brought up some raspberries the other day to bed, and she was like,
"What are you doing?
What are you doing, babe? What is that?" And I'm like,
"Well,
I'm
was it Nate Bargatze that said the only way his wife wouldn't hear him chewing is if he was eating underwater?"
Yes.
I think that's true in my house too.
I asked if he had any weird talents, and she said, "Absolutely not." And then she said this, which I think is really true. She said his talent is his mind. And I've just been in places with you where we're talking about a specific topic. It doesn't matter what it is, Calvinism, Arminianism. It doesn't matter if it's world history. It doesn't matter if it's this attack toward the church. And your mind just Googles things in order. It's you got a big brain. It's really, really cool. Been married for 24 years. She said, "Whew, it's been a rough." No, she did not. She did not. Been on staff for 24 years. Listen, he's easy and laid back, but don't poke the bear. All right. He's a sharpshooter. He loves to fish, loves to hunt, loves to run. Big influence in his life was Jim Elliot, missionary to Ecuador. He was killed by the people that he was trying to reach. Two things I'll add: he loves to laugh, and he loves violent movies, and both are good medicine for men. He's recommended so many good movies. I got one for you, too, that I want to tell you about after we're done. But one of his favorite verses, I tried to get her to tell me she wasn't sure. And so This is where she landed. 1 John 2:17, the world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. She get it right?
She got it right.
Good.
She got it right.
Loves his family. And is from a family of a bunch of J names. If you've not heard this, if you're brand new to our church, he's got brothers and sisters that all have J names: Julie, Joe, Judd. And in fact, not just J names, but their middle names start with an A. And so they all have J and A. And then one of the coolest things that your wife said, and I believe this, anyway, she said, in 24 years, he's never been mean to me. And I think that's awesome, man. My wife could absolutely not say that, but that's really, really cool. My guest today, if you haven't figured it out, is John Aaron Weiss. How are you, buddy?
I'm really good. I don't know what to do with that introduction, but I'm really good. I expected some kind of nonsense.
Anything else that you need to correct from what she said? Are you allowed chewer?
No, I am allowed. I don't know. I can't hear it myself.
Yeah.
I chew with my mouth closed, but my whole family, like my kids, they all make fun of me. They have to have stuff to make fun of us about, and that's one of the things. I'm good with it.
I mean, listen, if you want to make fun of me, making fun of being a loud chewer is, I'll take it.
There's other things I could definitely highlight.
She said that she had a really cool Beanie Baby collection, too.
Oh, good golly.
I'm just kidding.
I do not. And it went all my credibility with
I got them all. The American flag one's really good. I'm just kidding. Hey,
Ricky Bobby.
Before we dive in, we've been talking about the men's retreat. It's October 18th through the 20th. The theme is Battle Ready. It's for men 18 and up. It's for all 5 campuses and their friends. You've gone and been a part of men's retreats before. Talk about why you're excited about this one and why should guys sign up.
Yeah, men's retreats for me are one of my favorite things to be a part of and speak at. Yeah. Because I think there's always a bullseye on our back as men, and we're not always allowed to be ourselves in public. Yeah. And this is going to give us that opportunity. Yeah. We're going to laugh a lot. We're going to have a good time. I think, too, from just a preaching biblical standpoint, I'm fired up because the topic you gave me, Warrior King, to show that Jesus wasn't a sissy. We're following a man's man, and I'm going to do my best to prove that and get men fired up around that subject.
Yeah.
So
it's going to be a powerful weekend. So I just listen. I know this, and we're putting this together, this podcast together, several weeks before it'll come out. So I don't know where our numbers will be by the time it hits the air. But I know that we've got over 350 guys already signed up, which is great.
Awesome.
And it's been a week and change, and so it's been really, really cool. October 6th though is the last day to register, and so we've got to get groups together and figure out which campuses are going to be what lodges and all those type of things. And so we want to make sure that you get everything that you can. To jump in and do this. So you got about 9 days from when this podcast drops to sign up, and also make sure that the guys in your life sign up as well. And so to register, Southland.Church/men. Again, it's going to be a powerful weekend. You don't want to miss it. We're continuing in this series called Power. This is where we've been, John, and we've been looking at some key principles and opportunities that God gives us that ushers in a lot of power in our lives and also empowers us to live on mission. And today's episode is called The Power of an Invitation. And the most powerful things in our lives are created because someone invited us into them. And so we're going to zero in on what it means to share God's love with others. And we'll focus in on just really two words, personal evangelism. And I know it's scary for guys and may not know what to do. And I think today will be really helpful and we'll bring a lot of simplicity to what this looks like and how we can all do it. And I'll set up our time this way. I always try to start with Jesus, but his whole purpose for coming is found in Luke chapter 19, verse 10, and it says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." His mission was very clear. The Father sent the Son, put on flesh, walked among us, came close to creation, demonstrated the Father's love, and died on a cruel cross. And I always define the gospel as a rescue mission, and so that's super critical. And then what's interesting is before he dies on the cross, he invites guys into his public ministry, and he chooses these guys that would become his disciples. And the first two guys he talks with are Simon Peter and his brother Andrew. And the cool thing about this, they weren't from like these crazy powerful families or influential leaders in the community. They were just lowly, ordinary, common, blue-collar fishermen. And the point here, I think that God wants us to see is that he'll use anybody.
Yeah.
He uses anybody. And so Matthew 4:18-20, it says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew, and they were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. And then Jesus says in Matthew 4:19, come follow me. And Jesus said, I will send you out to fish for people. That's big. And then it says their response in verse 20, at once they left their nets and followed him. And there's so much here. He invites Simon, Peter, and Andrew to follow him, spells out his mission that would change their complete direction. You're no longer going to fish for fish. You're going to fish for people. And what he actually means is, I'm going to use you and leverage your life and your gifts and your availability to bring the good news to the world. And it says here, at once they left their nets and they followed him. At once. And they trusted Jesus. At once they were obedient. They made themselves available to Jesus, and Jesus invites them to follow him. But inside of that invitation was the invitation to share the gospel, to share the hope with the world. And you probably even use this analogy, this illustration. John Maxwell tells this goofy story of this small town man who was known as a great fisherman. I mean, I know you've got some parrot illustrations, some farmer jokes, and all that kind of stuff. But it says this. It says, and one day a stranger showed up and asked this fisherman, because he's a great fisherman. This stranger shows up and says, hey, would you take me fishing? And so they get on this boat, 5 a.m. in the morning. The stranger notices that the fisherman doesn't have a fishing pole, doesn't have any bait, any equipment. He drove up the boat into this remote area, reaches into this rusty old tackle box, pulls out a stick of dynamite, lights it, throws it in the water. There's this powerful explosion, and then dozens of dead fish float to the surface. And this guy starts scooping them up in his net, put them in the boat. And all of a sudden, this man that went with him pulls out a badge and says, hey, I'm the game warden, and you're under arrest. And the fisherman just looks at him very calmly, opens up the rusty tackle box, grabs another piece of dynamite, lights it, hands it to the game warden, and says, so you just going to sit there, or are you going to fish? Don't you love these cheesy illustrations?
Yeah, that's a good one.
But the cool thing in this is there's two things that I want to capture from this cheesy illustration. Number one, the gospel is the most powerful, explosive, life-altering news on the planet. And the word gospel just simply means good news. And we share stuff that matters to us all the time with people, whether it's a good song or a good place to go to do this or a good mechanic or whatever that is. And so why wouldn't we share the most important thing in our lives? And there's no greater news than that Jesus came, he put on flesh, he lived a perfect life, he demonstrated the Father's love and died a horrific death on the cross to pay for our sin, to shift the wrath of God off of us onto him, to bring us out of darkness and to adopt us into his family. And the gospel has the ability to melt the hardest heart, to reach the fastest rebel, to eradicate the deepest shame, alter any and every story, and usher in hope to those who are just hanging on by a thread. And the second key thing that I think is important for us to capture from this cheesy story of this fisherman and this guy is what he says. He says, so you're just going to sit there, or are you going to fish? Which is actually a really powerful question for us. For every Christ follower, for every man, for every church, are you just going to sit there? Or are you going to fish? Because it's actually a question that Jesus never asked his followers. It wasn't an option. It was part and parcel of accepting this invitation to follow him. To follow Jesus is to fish. To say yes to Jesus is to say yes to personal evangelism. But to receive the gospel is also an invitation to share the gospel, the good news. And there's an awful lot of churches, and there's an awful lot of people who sit back in the boat and they just refuse to fish. And so I'd like to start with just addressing the church. You and I both know this. The church is, especially in the U.S., has struggled. And the church is growing all over the world, and there's some churches in the U.S. that are certainly growing, and it's been awesome. We get to be a part of a really healthy church that we see God moving in people's lives all the time. Our baptistry is always full. We always see these cool stories, but many churches have peaked or are in decline. The church in the U.S. has really struggled with evangelism. And a couple quick stats that because I thought, you know what, I know these, but I wanted to look, and the first stat's even worse than before. The average church is around 65 people. And I used to hear that it was 80 people. Mm-hmm. And then I've also heard this stat. The average church sees about one person experience salvation in their church annually. That's it. Technically, if you have 100 people, it's usually one out of every 100 a year. And so even for them, it could be less than that. But those are heartbreaking statistics. Many churches also kind of seem satisfied with it. And so big question, why do you think the church struggles with loving lost people and helping people experience Jesus? Why do you think that is?
There are a variety of reasons. One, the people in those churches have forgotten what they were rescued from and rescued to.
Yeah.
So when you really appreciate your own salvation, man, I was rescued from death to life, from hell to heaven. Hell should be on our mind every day. We shouldn't want anyone to go there. Man, there's then just this urgency in you, this desire in you to want other people to experience what you've experienced, and that dies in most churches. Yeah. And I think a lot of that is because they equate spiritual maturity with knowledge of the Bible. And I always say, man, if you know your Bible, you're going to love your neighbor.
Yes.
And you're going to love people really well. Yeah. So it makes me sad to hear statistics like that. I'm glad we're not a part of a church like that. But I think overall, we've just put people around Bible studies.
Yeah.
And we haven't deployed them.
Yes.
And so I always equate spiritual maturity with people who are serving, giving, and loving, those three verbs. And if they're doing those three things, that's what Jesus did. And the church is supposed to be the body of Jesus on earth. So Jesus spent the majority of his time with people, very relational. We should be very relational. I also think about the heart of the Father. I'm a dad.
Yeah.
And man, if either one of my kids were missing, lost, I would hope that everybody I know would be looking for them, doing their best, as you described, to rescue them. And, I remember as a kid seeing, kidnapped kids on the side of a milk carton, and it brings it to light. Like, wow, someone's at home wondering where their child is, and that's God with every person on the planet.
Yes.
So we should have that same heartbeat.
Yeah. There are churches that, it's funny because when we started our church in Seattle, I remember someone saying, hey, are you guys an evangelistic church or a disciple building church? And I was like, what do you mean?
They're not exclusive from one another.
Yeah, you can't be one or the other. Yeah. And the problem is churches that decide that they go under this mindset, if we'll just build disciples, then they will go and love lost people. And it's really not true, right? Unpack that for a second.
Yeah, I think for a lot of churches, they've taken on this verb, you're discipling people. Jesus just took people, showed them how to love other people really well, and then sent them out to do the exact same thing. And what we read about in the book of Acts is they did it.
Yeah.
I mean, Acts chapter 2, there were no needs among these people.
We're here because.
They fed people, they clothed people, they did exactly what Jesus asked them to do. the American church has such a high view of education.
Yeah.
And so we equate, again, spiritual maturity with education, and our models are all around that, and they become these black holes that people get lost in. They sit in the same Sunday school class for 30 or 40 years. They know everybody in that class really, really well.
Sure.
But they really genuinely, they'll tell you they care about lost people, but by their behavior, you can tell they don't. Yeah. Matter of fact, they become so self-righteous that they begin to judge the very people that Jesus died for and the very people the church should be loving.
Yes.
That's where it gets scary for me, for them.
Yeah.
For people who claim to be following Jesus, but they're not loving their neighbor.
Yeah. Churches that create churches for insiders only, or churches that have forgotten Jesus' mission and the Father's heart. They have these shadow missions, whether that's, hey, we're just going to be about social justice, or hey, we're going to be very political. We're going to be very politically charged. We're going to try to help shift some of the stuff that happens in government or policy, or they have a progressive bent where they're just chasing these other things, or they're even legalistic. Those are things that just get in the way of God's heart for the church, which is to go seek and save the lost. So let's talk about why evangelism is important. We at Southland, and we say this often, we slanted the floor toward lost and broken people. Why is that? And again, it's not brand new, as in we've just been doing this. Our church has kind of always been that way. But talk about why we slant the floor towards lost and broken people.
It's the primary mission of the church. I mean, it's exactly what Jesus sent us out to do. So we're not going to make excuses for that. We want to joyfully pursue that. Again, I come back to the fact that the Father who rescued me and saved me and brought me into his family wants that for every other person. I just don't want to be stingy with that love. Yeah. So my practice is really simple. Every person I lock eyes with, I try to envision them being baptized. That's the first thing that comes to my mind is, man, I hope I get to be a part of that or see that day. It doesn't have to be me. Yeah. But man, I want to be a link in that chain that connects them back to the Father. So I just immediately begin praying for people, and then I think our whole church does a really good job at it. I mean, we see people constantly coming that are brand new. Just met with a guy before we did this podcast who is searching, trying to figure life out. Been through some hard stuff, and sometimes it takes years. I got people on prayer lists I've been praying for my whole life, and they're yet to surrender. But then there are other people that are they're ripe, like they've gone through something. Ready. Yeah, they're so ready. And so if you make yourself available, like our church does, man, God begins to lead people to you. Yeah. And I think if more churches would do that, we would see an incredible explosion of his Spirit at work in the lives of people.
That's good. Matthew 28:18-20, it's the Great Commission. It's what drives us, because Jesus told us to do this. He said, he came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth have been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. Not just discipleship, but he starts with go, And then he says, hey, as you go, surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. So that means wherever we go, to our college campuses, to our workplaces, to our homes, wherever we are in the world, he's going with us. And so he's not going, hey, just get out. He's going with us, and that's super important. And then also the great command, which we talk about a lot, Mark 12:30-31, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The second's like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And so that's what the church is called to be. And when we don't do that, it harms everybody inside it and everybody on the outside as well. Anything just to jump on any of that?
The love God, love people, we take our mission statement as a church from those verses. And the way I like to kind of categorize it in my own heart and mind is, I say the way we love God the best is by loving his kids. Yeah. And as a dad, that resonates with me. When people love my kids and are kind to them and generous to them, I'm grateful as a father. I'm just like, man, that's so wonderful to see. Right. So much more so with him. Yeah. He wants us to care about people. And I think we've formalized evangelism in an unhealthy way. Yeah. Everything, again, in the New Testament is very relationally couched. Just think about a family that's so incredible, and you want everybody to be a part of it and be at the table. And, don't be weird. There's enough weird Christians. But I think our witness has been somewhat compromised because our behaviors are too much like the world. Yeah. One of the greatest things is not what we say, but what we do, the way we treat our spouse, our families. Yeah. And two, just our demeanor. Yeah. Joy is the second fruit of the Spirit for a reason. And I think if we were just more expressive and more joyful, especially in such a sad world, that's contagious. People want to know why you're like that. And,
Absolutely.
and you can say, man, I mean, right before we got on here, you got a bad phone call about your dad. And it's like, that's hard to process that. But at the same time, we have joy because we know the end of the story. And I think the world needs that hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about people. We talked about the church. Let's talk about people and their struggle to embrace personal evangelism. And there's all kinds of reasons why people do. I'll just ramble through a couple of these, and I just would love to get your thoughts. What would you say to those Christ followers who have isolated themselves from the world? They don't know another lost person, not interested in knowing them. They just go, hey, listen, I've got grace. It's good enough for me, and I'm going to do my thing. And they just have never prioritized evangelism. What would you say to them?
You're in scary territory.
Yeah.
I mean, Revelation 2 and 3, when Jesus judges the 7 churches of Asia Minor, he's not gentle when they haven't done what he asked them to do. And so I think, we need to feel a little bit of the weight of that responsibility.
Yeah.
I think if you're a solid Christian, you've been following Jesus a long time, you understand the reality of hell and what this means for people. We don't want anyone to spend any time there. So that should motivate us on a high level to, be urgent with this message and with kindness. And sympathetic and patient with people. Yeah. So, I'm terrified for people who claim to be followers of Jesus, but the thing that made them a follower of Jesus, they're not sharing with other people. That level of hypocrisy, I genuinely don't understand. I think there's so many churches and so many Christians that are in real danger, in terms of how Jesus views their behavior.
I mean, if all this is true, you can give something away that you cannot lose, and why wouldn't you do that? To anybody that you care about, anybody that's even wild, that's even an enemy. It's like there's no one that's so far from God's reach that we wouldn't do what we could to help them know, hey, listen, God's got a different plan. This is what God did for you. And at the end of the day, they get to decide for themselves. But the reality is we don't get to just go, hey, they're bad and we're good. That's not true.
Yeah, I think people have a real arrogant view of themselves. Like, they've done God a favor by joining his family and his team. And they've forgotten that they're still sinful and in need of his salvation on a daily basis. And I think when we lose sight of that, we become self-righteous. We become, condemning and judgmental. And there's nothing uglier than a person who's received grace but doesn't give grace to other people.
Yes. You said this earlier, too, that they've forgotten. You said churches that have forgotten just the gospel in their own story. I mean, I love Paul's letters because he always starts with the gospel. Mm-hmm. He always talks about how good God was to lay down his life because we were sinners, because we were desperate, because we needed him. The wage of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. And I just think we have to be reminded of our own rescue story every day, and that should compel us to look around at the world and go, man, if it's available for me, it's available for everybody. And here's a second kind of scenario. What would you say to those who think that they're not capable or not spiritual enough to share the gospel? You could have some guys that have been maybe in church for a long time and they just have never really taken the time to really pursue a relationship with Jesus, so they don't feel like they know a lot. Or you've got somebody that's brand new and they're going, I literally just came to Christ like this year or 2 months ago or Sunday. What would you say to them? Because I think the enemy would want to whisper, hey, you don't know enough. Even our own thoughts about ourselves go, hey, this is a big task, and I don't know that I know enough to do this. What would you say to them?
Yeah, most of the people I've seen that have come to Christ in adulthood, it was a series of people who worked with each other and with God to reach that person. Yeah, right. And so it's rarely just one conversation or you answered all their questions. If you can mow grass for somebody, you can do a favor for them. Yeah. That's an act of kindness. If you can bake a pie, man, pie would get me to Jesus pretty fast, to be honest with you. There's little things like that we just neglect, and we think, man, if we all work together and bring our gifts to the table, if you're a mechanic and you can fix someone's car, we had a ministry that started here that's so robust, but it began years ago by men changing oil for single moms because they couldn't afford it or they didn't have the margin. They just bring their cars out here, and these guys would show up. And so many single moms came to Christ. Yeah. And then this huge ministry ballooned where now we're giving away furniture and clothing. Yeah, we got a mechanic shop out there. We got a wood shop out there.
Well,
and you think about Charlie, the guy that started that. Yeah. I mean, he worked in an auto parts store for his dad, and he's just a good old boy, but his heart was right. So I just think we make excuses that don't stand up. But if we would just partner with each other, don't put it all on you. The whole weight of responsibility is not on you.
Yeah, absolutely. Our job is just to go. Here's a big one that I think is interesting sometimes for church people. They will go, hey, evangelism is really not my job. It's the people that work for churches. What would you say to that? Would you swat that fly hard?
Yeah, I'll hit it hard. I think the lie in that is those of us that are working in a church are around all the lost people. Most of the people in our church are rubbing shoulders with them on a daily basis. You're in an office space for 8 hours a day with tons of people.
You're on a mission field.
Yeah, and it's sometimes harder for guys like us because we have to go looking for those opportunities.
Right.
You can go to the gym, or we coach baseball, that kind of stuff. And I mean, anywhere you go, you need to have your eyes open to who here doesn't know Jesus. And again, visualize them in the baptistry surrendering and the whole church celebrating that, because that's the win at the end of the day.
If it depends upon church staff, ministry staff, the reality is we're never going to reach everybody, because the mission field's everywhere where we are, including where you're working, men, where you are every single day. And so the reality is this is not varsity and JV where church staff are varsity and everybody else is JV. No, we all Jesus is on the front of the jersey, and we all do this for him. It's funny how even just eliminating our titles at church is just we're just trying to. Hey, here's the deal. We're here to serve people and serve the Lord. That's what we're doing, and we all work in these different specific areas. But the reality is, he uses the church to reach the world. That's his primary vehicle for sharing the gospel. And if you're in a church, you're in our church, then that means you're a part of that mission. And so we got to be about that. I want to zero in a couple practical things that can really empower our men to share the gospel with their friends and family. We're not asking people to go out and stand on a corner with a bullhorn and preach
Please
hellfire. Don't do that. I mean, I just saw it on the way home from vacation. I was like, oh my gosh, we're not asking people to go door to door like a Mormon on a bike and hand out tracts. We're not asking you to try to win every theological argument. That's not what we're asking you to do at all. But there's some practical things I think will be helpful for our men listening as they begin to think through how they might do it. And I'll just rattle off a few things and see, because we've already kind of moved towards some of these. But the first one is just prayer. You've already mentioned this. You try to lead with prayer, thinking and understanding, hey, I don't know where they are, but talk about the importance of prayer for those in our lives that don't know the Lord. We can do a whole lot more praying, especially initially, but even throughout the process of trying to reach people. But we're praying for opportunities to connect with people, praying for ways that we can get to know them and build a relationship, praying for the power of prayer to change and open up people to just a willingness to hear about the gospel. But your dad Roy modeled this for us. I mean, your dad would talk about a prayer that he prayed every day. Mm-hmm. Talk about that and how it impacted you.
Yeah, it's always good to remember that when you pray, you're starting from a position of victory.
Yeah.
Because the Father already wants that person to come to him.
Correct.
So you're aligning your life with his desire and his heart. So he's going to answer that prayer. He just is. And the more you begin to see that, the more faithful you'll be and the more courageous you'll be. I'm a person who's wrestled with fear my whole life, but I've watched so many people come to Christ because of prayer.
Yeah.
They were stubborn, they were hard-hearted, they were mean, they were wounded, whatever. And then all of a sudden, man, they put their guard down and they let the love of the Father in. So my dad would pray a simple prayer every day.
This is so cool.
He's like, God, I'm available. If you'll put 3 people in my path today that I don't know you, I'll be faithful in some way to plant a seed or tell them about Jesus if the opportunity affords itself. And then he kept a meticulous journal at the end of every day of the people he met. And then he would usually try to double back. If he met them in a specific place, he would go back to see them. And over the years, he would go back and highlight the names that had come to Christ. And it's just insane when you look at that journal and you see all those names of total strangers, most of them. Some of them were people we knew that he would bump into, and they would end up in his journal. And he'd put the date beside where we took him to the creek and baptized him.
Yeah.
And I'm not exaggerating this, like thousands of people. And he wasn't a fancy guy. I've told you this. He had 2 pairs of pants and 2 shirts. He kept it really simple. And he just relentlessly loved people, and he was joyful.
Yeah.
But it was because he was available.
Yeah.
And he put himself out there and he prayed.
Yeah.
And then God did the work. And that's, the Bible says God will draw all people to himself. Yeah. So we just have to join him in that. When there's sincerity to see that, he's gonna act.
Yeah, it's awesome. Talk about the power. We've already kind of mentioned this about serving others. You talk about cutting grass, making a pie. when we're just willing to look and see the needs of people around us, again, people at work, people in our neighborhood, people that live across the street, people that we learn a little bit about what's going on in their lives, and we move toward them. Talk about the power of serving, how that even opens up the door to people that are, you go, why would you do this? You know?
The world is so hostile today. So everybody's fists are up there. Everybody's in a defensive posture, and they're all trying to protect themselves. And, you know, when you serve someone, you break through all of those barriers.
Right.
And people categorically don't know what to do with that.
Sure.
It's like, oh, you did, man, wow, you paid for my dinner, or you put new tires on my car. I couldn't have afforded it. When people say, this is what I need, I think it's the responsibility of Christians to just meet that need.
Yeah.
You've heard me say this before, but all too often we assume what people need. We need to ask,
hey,
what could I do for you?
Yeah.
And what would alleviate some of the pressure in your life? And whatever they tell you, then we're on the hook as the followers of Jesus to go figure that out. If we got to go get a couple other guys and get some money together, let's go do that.
I love it how people sometimes they'll reach out to their group and go, hey, listen, there's this person that's in my life and they need this now. And so people will just pony up and Venmo each other or go buy it or whatever. And it's the neatest thing, seeing people go, no, we see you and we see what you're going through, and we want you to know that, hey, you're not always going to be in this situation, but we've been in that spot before, so we want to help people.
A great example of this, we have a special needs adult in our church who loves baseball, so we got him tickets to the Lexington Legends, and he has regular season tickets now because they finally donated them to him.
Yeah.
Well, then the people at the ballpark realized he doesn't have money to buy food from the concession stands. They bought him this card it's limitless. He can buy as much food and popcorn and candy as he wants, which is awesome. But the coolest thing is now there's this orbit of people who are like, how'd he end up here?
Yeah.
And they're connecting the dots back to our church. And so I'm getting phone calls from people who are just in his world. Man, he's evangelistic without even realizing he's simply because a group of people loved him. And now we're getting an opportunity to influence other people as a result of that. And that was such a simple thing, to pick up the phone and go, hey, could you bless this guy with some season tickets? He loves baseball.
Yeah, that's good. The power of an invitation. And it could be an invitation to church, to our weekend services. It could be to a men's group or a marriage event or student ministries if you're a high school student. Invite one of your friends just to come, or our men's retreat, or even we do so many things like Meal Pack and so many other things. But, you know, again, most of the things that we're married because I extended an invitation to my wife and you did the same. Mm-hmm. I mean, the reason I'm even in church is because there was a guy that invited me to church for 3.5 years, and I told him no every single time. And what I didn't know is that his parents were praying for me every day, you know, and 5 years later, I give my life to Jesus. But talk about the power of an invitation, because I think sometimes we just go, I don't know if it's going to be that big a deal.
Yeah, you and I have experienced this so much. Like, I am a totally different man because of my relationships in the church. I am blessed with so many wonderful people because of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so many people out there are so lonely, and they're in such tough spots, and they really genuinely don't know what to do next. And all they need is to be enveloped into God's family.
Yeah.
And the worst thing, you know, that someone can do is say no.
That's it.
To the invitation. That's it. In our country, like, we're not facing persecution where they're going to throw us. That may come.
Right.
But at this point in our history, all they can do is reject the invitation.
Or think we're weird because we're Christians.
Yeah. But we can continue to disprove that, you know, by the fruit in our lives. So I just think what we have is genuinely, sincerely what most people want.
Yeah.
And whether they know it or not,
correct,
that's to be debated. But I think once they experience it, it's irresistible. I mean, I wouldn't trade my friendship with you and these guys or anyone else for anything in this world. I mean, you could take literally everything away from me, but I am rich because of my relationships.
Yeah. Big time. Talk about sharing your story, because I think sometimes we go, hey, we'll just invite them to church and I'll hold my story in my back pocket
and lead with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where I'm trying to tell guys that our story is one of our greatest weapons. Outside of the Spirit of God and the Word of God, our stories, again, whatever they are, whatever our backstory is in finding Jesus, our story is really, really powerful. And so talk about why it's so critical for us to be able to share just our story, our testimony with people.
Yeah. There's two natures to truth. You have the objective nature of truth, which is the Bible.
This is the mind thing that Allison was talking about. I love this.
This is off script, yeah.
That's right.
And then you have the subjective nature of truth, which is your experience. Mm-hmm. you can always find someone to argue with objective truth. They just will,
Yeah.
even if it's true. I mean, I meet people all the time who just want to deny the reality of God.
Sure.
They don't have good reason,
Right.
but they think they do.
Right.
It's impossible to argue with the subjective nature of truth, which is the difference that God has made in your life.
That's right.
And, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old Scott Hatfield versus, what are you, 32? Something in that range.
Yeah.
A lot of wear and tear.
Yeah.
You're a different man because of Jesus. And so if you lead with that, here's the difference God has made in my life.
Yeah.
That's really hard to argue with.
Yeah. I mean, and it's okay to go, hey, man, I'm still working on this stuff, but man, this is what I found, and this is what God's done for me. And it's really hard to argue with life change.
Well, and that's an important point too, is the honesty piece. You're not perfect.
Yeah.
And so in the midst of telling your story, you're also saying,
I'm still a mess.
My whole life I've always struggled with this. I might struggle with this till I die. I hope not. I hope God eventually gives me victory over this, but here's where he's helped me have victory in certain areas of my life. Here's certain behaviors I continue to run back to because I'm an idiot. And if you're an idiot, welcome. But man, at least we get to do it together with God's help.
Yeah, I'm a wreck on my best day. And in some ways, sometimes what we do, we think that our story has to make us the hero. And it's like, no, man. We point toward our hero.
That's right.
We point toward him. That's the gravity.
Well, and the cool thing about the Bible is it's practical. I think where most people get hung up with the Bible is because we're talking about these massive theological concepts without first pointing to practical theology. The Bible works in practice every day. Like when I put what it says about finances in place, my financial situation gets better.
Yeah.
When I treat my wife the way the Bible tells me to treat my wife, it gets better.
Crazy.
It works. And so that's what I tend to point to before we get up into all the stuff that people get hung up on.
Yes. Insights for men that maybe too often we don't share God's love with people because we feel like we don't know enough or we don't have all the answers. There's a story in John 4, 1 through 42. I won't read it, but it's a story of Jesus moving into Samaria. He walks through there, and again, Jews would walk around Samaria. They didn't want to be there. They viewed Samaritans as half-breeds, as interracial, as people that weren't loved. And Jesus makes for a beeline to this well, and he goes and sends the disciples off. And this woman comes, and she's a Samaritan woman. She comes, and she is going to this well in the middle of the day, and she's left even the village where she was from to go to this well, and Jesus knows that she's coming, and he has this opportunity to engage with her. And she's got a heck of a backstory. She carries around failed marriages and sexual shame everywhere she goes. In fact, she didn't want to go to that well because she didn't want to run into these other women who were judgmental, who were talking bad about her and all these different things. And so she gets to this well, and she sees a Jewish man, which is odd in their part of the world. Why is he here? And then he engages her. He asks her for a drink, which would have not been good and for a Jewish man to even address a woman, much less a Samaritan. And then from there they have this discussion. And Jesus says, well, actually, I have living water, and this living water would change your life. And it's about God's grace. And they keep having this discussion. She's like, well, where is it? Give it to me. And he says, well, tell me, and he digs in her story, and he says, why don't you go get your husband? And she says, I don't have a husband. He's like, you're right. You've had 5 husbands, and the man that you're living with is not your husband. And he brings grace and truth into this matter. And all of a sudden, she's eyes open, tries to change the subject, moves toward religion, and then eventually it leads toward Jesus saying, hey, you just mentioned the Messiah. You're looking at him. Mm-hmm. And in that exchange, in that powerful moment, it transforms her to the point where she sets down her water bucket and heads back toward her town and village to tell all these people who don't like her, could care less about her, hey, you got to know this. There's this guy I met. I think he's the Messiah. Come and see. And the town goes on this field trip to where this well is, and Jesus is there. And all of a sudden, all these people come to know Jesus because of this woman's story. And the insights in this is that this woman had no Jewish training. She's not a biblical theologian. All she knew was that she had met Jesus. She had one sermon. Mm-hmm. That's it. She couldn't answer all the big questions. Here's what she knew. This man told me everything I ever did. He offered me living water that's changing my life. Could this be the Messiah? That's all she had. And she leveraged the power of her story and her encounter with Jesus with the people in her life. She had one song, and she just kept singing it. And when Jesus changes a man's life, all we have to do is share what we have. That's it. To tell our story, to talk about our encounter with Jesus. All we're trying to do is get them in close proximity to Jesus. That's what this woman did. You got to come and see. You got to come and see this man. And if we can get them in close proximity to Jesus,
he does the work.
He does the rest.
You don't have to sell him.
Yeah. I mean, there's another story. Or go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's fascinating because we see there individually and collectively the way this should work. And so individually, do everything you can to build relationships with everyone you meet that are going to be lasting. Think about your funeral, the people you want to be there, the lasting impression you're going to leave with them.
Yeah.
And again, picture them in the baptistry. But I think the other thing is collectively, if you're listening to this and your church is not evangelistic, challenge the people in your church. We need to unplug everything we're doing and figure out how do we reach our community.
Yes.
Because that was community specific. That's a little town in Samaria that Jesus targeted, and that whole community got changed because a group of people got changed. And that's true for us here in Kentucky. We're not sure how this would work maybe in Ohio or Tennessee.
Sure.
We're very aware of how it works in our local context, and we're doing everything we can to meet the needs in this community.
Yeah.
So we're doing it individually, but we're also doing it collectively.
Yes.
And there's power in both because, man, when I lock arms with you and thousands of other people, we're a force. It's almost impossible to get your head around, but it cannot be stopped.
Yes.
And that same power is available to you individually. I just see both working together.
Absolutely. Another story is the man that was born blind, and he's he's healed, and the Pharisees are there, and they're like, I can't believe you, who did this, blah, blah, and all this back and forth, brings his family in, was he blind, blah, blah, who did this, and eventually they get to the man, he's like, hey, I mean, it'd be cool if, I was blind my whole life, and we're just still talking about how this happened. Let's have a party, know, and the reality is they finally ask him, who is this man? And he says, listen, I don't know, but here's what I know. I was blind, now I see. And the translation there is you don't have to have all the answers. Just share what you've got. Just share what God's done in your life. Super important.
Yeah. My grandmother came to Christ because some people invited her to something, but her whole life she never felt like she could go. One, to church because she was divorced.
Yeah.
And two, because she didn't have the clothing.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, that's one of the things that's always there in the forefront of my mind is I'm never going to outdress the people I'm trying to reach. Yeah. And I don't want our church to do that either. I want people to feel like they can show up as they are, and it's going to be okay because who cares about what you're wearing?
Yeah, absolutely. Another cool story in the Bible is the calling of Matthew. Jewish man, worked for Rome. He was a tax collector, and he would leverage the authority of Rome to harshly tax his own people. And from that, he was also just kind of skim what was on top, so that way whatever he got extra, he kept for himself. And so he was hated. No one, you stepped over the line, you're working for Rome, and you're harming us, and you're exploiting us for your own gain. And so Matthew is well aware of Jesus, seen him teach, seen him perform miracles. And then Jesus walks up to him at his booth and says, hey, follow me. And Matthew does what Peter and Andrew does. He gets up from his table and follows him. And here's what I think is so cool about this story, because Matthew actually writes about it. He writes about his own story in the book of Matthew. And it goes from that moment where he gets up and leaves his tax collector booth to the very next moment, the very next scene, which is Matthew 9:10. It says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, he went from following him to, hey, we're going to have dinner. Having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. So Matthew throws a party, and he fires up the grill, and he invites Jesus and the disciples, and he invites all of his buddies too. And it says that they were tax collectors and sinners. He's brought all these dudes. He's like, dude, you just got to come. So he throws this party because Jesus has changed his life, and all he wants to do is get his friends in close proximity to Jesus. And here's the cool thing about this. We can do the same thing. We can throw a Matthew party. Inviting someone to church may not be your first thing. It might be something like this. You get your friends from our church together, and their friends who don't know the Lord or aren't church, and then we get us all together in one place, and we just rub shoulders and get to know people, and we just have fun. But it can look all kinds of ways. I've done this in so many groups at church, in so many different churches, where basically our group, people that are in our group, we go, hey, who are some friends we want to invite? We're going to throw a big party this weekend. And we're just getting together. We're gonna grill. People are going to make stuff. We're going to put all the stuff out, and all of a sudden, all of our friends show up that don't know the Lord. And as we hang out that day, and people are in the pool, we're playing games or whatever that is, we're throwing cornhole, getting to know each other. All of a sudden, some of these friends go, "Hey, who are these people? Mm-hmm. Who are these? These are great people." Mm-hmm. And
simple.
Yeah, these are people that are in our church, and we have this group that meets, and we just get together and encourage each other and pray for each other and work on our marriages and our families. And
all of a sudden, they're in.
Yeah, can we come?
Yeah,
it's like.
Well, that story is so fun because even in the flow of Matthew's gospel, Matthew 8 and 9, structurally, he puts 3 miracles on the front end.
Yeah.
Then Jesus calls him, and then he writes about 3 more miracles on the back end. And it tells you how Matthew sees himself.
Yeah.
It's not in chronology. It's not the way it actually flowed. He inserted himself between all those miracles because he saw the fact that Jesus called him.
Biggest miracle that he'd seen was that he would change his own life.
The same, in the vein of all these amazing things Jesus did, Matthew's like, you want to know something really crazy? He changed me.
Yeah.
And then he was like, as you said, invited all of his friends to hear about it.
Yeah. You can do
so
this.
Good.
You can do this with work friends. You can do this with friends in your neighborhood, friends that your kids are connected with on sports teams or whatever. Guys, you can go golfing, and we got to foursome, and some of the guys will be guys from church, and some of the guys will be guys that have no interest in church, and just see what happens. I know guys that have running groups, and they do the same thing. They just got to, we're getting together for running, and so some of the guys are guys that are Christ followers, and some of the guys are the guys that are not, and whether that's shooting hoops or going fishing or shooting guns, going hunting, whatever it is. Christian guys inviting their unchurched friends to something fun and watch God show up. And the reality is, locker room, here's the challenge. I want you to think about your world and your connections and the people in your life that don't know the Lord, and figure out creative ways to connect them with some godly men or some godly couples in our church, and just see what happens. Throw a Matthew party. The Bible says that Jesus is with us. Have fun. Be intentional. Love people well. And you never know the doors that are going to open simply because of an invitation. And I know that you and Allison have done that a bunch. And any stories that come to mind as you think about just getting people together, and some are church people, some that are not, and just seeing God work and move?
I think back to our coaching baseball days, we did it a lot. And, people are going to get drunk.
Yeah.
People are going to cuss a lot. You got to be comfortable with having expectations that are realistic, because they're going to bring their mess into your world. And but it opens up opportunities to talk to your kids about our lifestyle and the choices we make in comparison. And not in a judgmental way, but you're going to you got to expect a little bit of chaos.
Yeah, we're not going to expect the world to act like Christians.
Like us, yeah.
And so that we just have to pull that off the table and go, hey, we're just going to love. How did God love us before we knew him? Unconditionally. Mm-hmm. And so we have to figure out how to do that and do that well. Our church is full of these cool stories, but before we get there, any tips? Because we kind of mentioned a couple things just that you would share with our locker room community about personal evangelism. Like that, don't be weird. There's probably plenty of things. Don't over talk. Be interested in other people.
Yeah. I think the word preaching is a dialogue word in the New Testament. Unfortunately, we've made it into something it wasn't intended to be. It's become public speaking. But really what preaching is proclaiming who Jesus is and the difference he's made in our lives. Yeah. And I always say that should happen through personality. Yeah. So I want to be the same person on this podcast that I am on stage, that I am in my home or out in public. So whoever you are, just be authentic and sincere about it. And that makes it a lot more believable.
Yes.
When you all of a sudden have to put on this Christian letter jacket and all of a sudden you change, people pick up on that. They can smell that and sniff that out. So be true to who God made you to be, and it'll be a lot more effective.
Yeah. We mentioned Jim Elliott. I didn't have this in my notes, but he made such a huge impact in your life. Mm-hmm. Just his willingness to go. And I thought about in the future doing different podcasts about great Christian heroes, leaders.
He would be one.
But talk about just his heart for lost people. What he want. I mean, there's plenty of people that probably wouldn't know any of that story, and you can keep it tight. But
yeah, he was in college and looking around at all the guys in Bible college and realizing they're all going to lead great American churches. And I was in the same boat when I was in college. This is why it had such an impact on me. I'm looking around in class, going, man. Yeah. all my friends are capable of leading the American church, but there are all these countries where people have never even had an opportunity to hear.
Yeah.
And so Jim Elliot, with 4 of the buddies, went to the jungles of Ecuador to a headhunting cannibalistic tribe and tried to figure out how to reach them, and eventually it cost them their lives. But what was cool is on the back end, after they were murdered and martyred, all their wives stayed in the jungle and eventually were able to lead those people to Christ. So there's this region of Ecuador today where it's just highly Christian because these guys were willing to lay their life down, and these Indian people saw this, that all those guys had guns. They could have killed the Indians that were coming at them, and they chose to die instead.
Yeah.
And once the Indians realized that, they thought there might be something to this. And then the wives went in after them and shared the love of God with them. So that had a huge impact on me. I thought, man, Jesus laid his life down for us. Are we willing to lay ours down for the sake of the gospel? It just puts things in perspective. And we're not all called to do things like that, but there are so many people around the world who've never been given an opportunity to even hear.
I mean, we're called to our neighbor. We're called to our workplace. We're called to our school. We're called to our sports team. We're called to our neighbor. All those things. Our church is full of powerful stories. And I mean, you've been here for 24 years. And so I have no doubt that in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking through just some of the things along the way. There have been people that been so far from God, people who were witches, been people that were in the mafia, been people that were, had been in prison, people that had murdered people. I mean, just the crazy stories of people. But can you think about, is there any stories that come to mind as you think about some of our own people leading people, their friends and their family, co-workers to the Lord? Anything come to mind?
Absolutely. Interacted with a lady yesterday that's one of my favorite people on the planet. And I jokingly, in an email exchange with her, I said, I hope we're neighbors in heaven, because she's just a wonderful person. But she was an exotic dancer in a club, and she was led to Christ, and it was such a transformational moment for her. She started a ministry, started reaching exotic dancers, and it was really effective. And then she realized, I got to get even further upstream. So now she works with prostitution, and she's trying to get girls off the street. And we were emailing about they provide food for ladies that want to get out. And, our church provided some resources for her. But I'm so proud of her, and I'm proud to be her friend and her brother, because it's so sincere. Yeah. And she doesn't care what other people think. I mean, she's reaching people that no one's even paying attention to. Yeah. And she's even reaching some of the police officers who have to arrest these ladies on a regular basis. I just love the ripple effect of her ministry, but having a front row seat to that, I mean, if there are rewards in heaven, I hope she gets a huge one, because she deserves it. She's
a powerful force in our community, and it's the coolest thing, and most people don't know who she is.
Nope.
It's awesome.
Yep.
This boils down to us understanding Jesus' heart for people. And I love this passage. Again, Matthew, it's right here, right after his story, but Matthew 9:35-38. I'll read it from the Message. It says, Then Jesus made a circuit of all the towns and villages. He taught in their meeting places, reported kingdom news. He healed their diseased bodies. He healed their bruised and hurt lives. And then here's the big statement. It says, when he looked over the crowds, it says his heart broke. So confused and aimless they were, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he says, what a huge harvest. And he says this to the disciples, how few workers, on your knees and pray for harvest hands. As Jesus is walking through the world that he's invaded on mission to rescue, he looks around, and as he looks around, he just sees. He sees brokenness, he sees confusion, he sees aimlessness. He says, like sheep without a shepherd. And it says his heart broke at their confusion, at their sin, at their lack of understanding of who God is and what he came to do for them. And we have to ask God to give us the eyes of Jesus. And my prayer is that he would break our hearts for the people in our lives, that we'd have broken hearts for our families and our neighbors and our kids' friends and the guys at work and the people that he puts in front of us on a daily basis. And that would compel us to be more intentional and to pray for people and to move toward them, to just be interested and to move toward them with a lot of grace and even truth and to walk through the doors that he provides. And I just want to remind us all, because I think we get short-sighted and we forget this important truth. The only difference between us and those who don't know Jesus is Jesus. That's it. We're not better than the world. God doesn't love us more. His death on the cross was enough for their sin and their brokenness, not just ours. And so we don't have to get greedy with the gospel. And we have to go, you know what, he probably could never reach them, because the reality is impossible is within his grasp. There's nothing impossible with God. And I love this. Evangelism is not for just people like you and I. It's for all of us. And I love this statement from D.T. Nile. He simplifies personal evangelism with this statement. Christianity is one beggar telling another beggar where to find food. That's all this is. I found hope. Man, this is what he's done in my life. I really hope that you'll wrestle with this. And if I can help you wrestle with this, I want you to know that I'm here. But man, he loves you.
Yeah.
And you matter to him.
Yeah.
You know, so critical.
We, Allison and I are empty nesters now, and so we have a little bit more time. And we go to Walmart a couple times a week, and people tease me about it, but I love going to Walmart. And one of the reasons I'm going is because there's a woman there that we've met. And so the other night we were picking up some stuff. She said, Allison said, well, get 2 or 3 of those so we don't have to, And I said, no, let's just get one. That it's an excuse to come back, because every time we're there, we bump into this lady that works there. Yeah. And there's always a conversation. She is watching us on TV. She's eavesdropping.
Yeah.
And so 2 nights ago, we met at the deli section. She was wheeling one of those carts around getting someone's to-go order. So I had just a split second with her. But, every little touch is a touch. And it's an opportunity. Man, I want to see her move from being this kind of distant observer to someone who's up close and personal, maybe on the front row, with all of us.
Yeah.
That's my desire.
When we see people the way God sees people, it changes our hearts.
Yeah.
And man, when you see these opportunities that he puts in front of us, and sometimes it's maybe where we eat or where we shop or the oil changes that we get or whatever that looks like. The same person that we see in the gym all the time that has their AirPods on and they don't act like they want to be bothered. But man, just to move towards some of them and just be available and just go, hey man, it's awesome, man. How you doing? Good job out here, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Thanks for what you do. Over and over again, it matters. It really does matter. God's primary purpose for reaching the world is through the gospel is his church. That's it. That's his primary purpose. And part of our job as men to fight for the most important things is to fight for people who have yet to experience the love of God. And we've really probably already hinted at this, and I'll just say it out loud. It's not our job to convert people. It's way above. It doesn't matter how smart we are. I can't do that for anybody else. You can't do that for anybody else. That's the work of the Holy Spirit in someone's life and the Word of God taking root in someone's life. But our job is to love people and put ourselves in close proximity to people that don't know Jesus, and to bring Jesus with us, and to pray and to build relationships and to serve people well, to share our stories, invite them to wrestle with the claims of Jesus, and Jesus will do the rest. And so, and this is big. Don't say no for someone else. Don't just assume that they're going to say no. Don't give up because you asked somebody one Easter service to come to our church and they said, no, I don't want to go. God's actively pursuing people. I love the Experiencing God book. It just constantly talks about God's activity. And when we moved to Seattle, it wasn't like, hey, we're coming with this. We're bringing all this. No, God was already active there.
Sure.
And we were just joining him in that effort. And so what we know about God is that God has a heart for people, and he was willing to give up his one and his only so that we would know and experience his love. And so he's actively moving in people's life, trying to show them who he is, trying to whisper to them about his love over and over again. And so if we will just join him in that effort, God could do a remarkable work. And so don't just settle for a stack of no's, because a stack of no's could become a yes that opens up the door of the gospel. Everybody deserves a chance to know that Jesus loves them. And then here's the deal. They can decide for themselves. But only Jesus can save people. Our job is to simply leverage the power of an invitation. And I'll close with this quote about personal evangelism. I love this because it really does kind of level the ground for all of us. I am just a nobody trying to tell everybody about somebody who can save anybody.
Great line.
That's it.
Yeah.
I'm just a nobody. Trying to tell everybody about somebody who can save anybody.
We're proof of that.
We are definitely proof of that. So anything else you want to close us with?
No, I'm glad we're covering this subject. It's so important. Churches have become clubs. They're no longer churches. They're just clubs.
Yeah.
And that breaks my heart.
Yeah, we got to be hospitals and rescue missions that go after people. So, man, thanks for coming on. I love you, buddy. I appreciate you. Grateful for you. Thanks for the way that you invest in men. I'm really glad that you're going to get to be a part of the men's retreat. I'm so excited about how God's going to use that weekend to really powerfully change and continue just to nurture the culture of strong, godly men in our church. So Make sure you sign up for men's retreat at Southland.Church. Space is going to be limited by the time you hear this, and so you don't want to end up on a waiting list. Registration closes on Sunday, October 6th. Sign up, and don't forget to invite a friend. It's been cool hearing stories of guys who they haven't just signed up, but they've paid for another registration so that they can make sure that somebody goes.
That's cool.
Hey, I've already paid for it, man. You got to jump in with us, that type of thing. Just leverage the power of an invitation. If this podcast has encouraged you, I'd love to hear from you. I say this every time. If you're wrestling with Christianity, or you are interested in becoming a Christ follower, or you're ready to get baptized, need help in taking whatever your next step is, shoot us an email at lockerroom@southland.church. We'd be happy to help you in any way that we can. I'd get you in the right place, have a conversation with you. I've had some great conversations with people. I had a conversation with a guy from North Carolina last week, just trying to help him in some areas. And so we're happy to help in any way that we can. And so leverage the opportunity just to reach out. And if we can help, we're happy to do that. And as always, if this podcast has encouraged you, share it with a friend. There's some guys in your life. This topic is central to the heart of God, and it has to be central to the heart of our men. And so pass it on. Thanks for listening. Again, thanks for coming on, man.
God be here.
We'll catch you next time on Locker Room. Have a good one, everybody.